Yeah, man, I'm not sure if I had a choice about wrestling or not. I don't remember really. It's just something that I knew I was gonna do. I Dad obviously wrestled at Bay High. Dad was a really good wrestler. He was the first Bay High wrestler to ever make the state finals back in 1982. And the same day, one of his teammates, Chris Newdecker, made it, and he was the first state champion for Bay High. So, and then my grandmother was the wrestlerette coach for 17 years under Coach Feuder. So when I was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, they would take me to all the matches. And back then, there was one or two tournaments, the Bay Invitational, and maybe a couple out of town, but most everything was dual meets. And I think I could tell you the lineups from every team from early '90s to pretty much now. I was just a kid and a fan, and I'd get to go to the wrestling room and watch Coach Feuder and watch those guys, and they that was back when they were a really good program, finishing top five in state several times, and you sitting there watching these guys compete, and it was I guess that's what hooked me. Dad being a part of it, and I think I started competing. I never competed before middle school. I didn't. I wrestled in the wrestling rooms with those guys, but I didn't actually compete until I was in middle school. We had middle school wrestling back then, and when I was in seventh grade, I went out for the team at Mowat. Coach Daryl Hallman was the coach back then, and I came into it knowing some stuff, but that guy he's a genius with young kids. He was there was a reason he won one county championship after the other. As a coach now, back then, I don't know if I appreciated it as much, but as a coach now, taking somebody that's never wrestled before, a first year guy, and having them go 8-2 in a season, which we had 10 matches in those middle school seasons, but uh, that's a big deal, and he was really good at it because he'd do it from the top to the bottom of the lineup. And so I was lucky to be a part of that program, seventh and eighth grade. Uh, I got to Bay High. I was back then. Middle school we just wrestled the six other middle schools in the county. We the highest you could go was county championship, but I was county champion. And Dad, my eighth grade year was Feuder's last year. So my ninth grade year, Dad took over, and he had assisted through the years, Feuder, on and off at different years. I think he assisted the 88, 89 team was the first time that he actually coached a Bay. So, from 88 till 2022, he hasn't been there the whole time, but he's been there on and off throughout the years. And, so in my ninth grade year, which was 99, 2000, he took over when Feuder retired, and I got to wrestle for him, and had some really good guys in that room. Carl Snyder, Chris Snyder, Thomas Ray, Walt Peacock, uh, David Yetterberg, Greg Means, all really good wrestlers back then, and at least I thought they were. And I got to, I tried to be a sponge and soak it up, and I got a lot better that year. So you came in and showed that, but when you came in, you had a notebook with you, and you had everything that you wanted to teach written down on that notebook. And man, that resonated with me so much because my very first experience with coaching, I'll never forget it. And, when I started coaching at Bay, before Dad started this round, was 2016 under Vern Barth, who was the coach at the time and the athletic director. Uh, and he is probably one of the best coaches I've ever been around in my life. The guy uh, absolutely loves kids. He could get a kid to buy into anything. I think when he took over that program, he had 10 or 12 kids, and when he left in 18, there was 42 kids, and they were district champs. But he didn't know a lot about wrestling, and he was wide open about that. And the first practice I walked into, he was showing a belly whizzer to the team on YouTube. They were kind of sitting around. He was showing it to them, and I walked in, after practice had started, after I got off work, and as soon as I walked in, hey Zach, you know how to do a belly whizzer? I'm like, yeah, no problem, And I knew two kids on the team. My little brother was on the team, and I knew his buddy Trey. So Aaron and Trey, y'all come out here and, Trey, you do this, Aaron, you do this. And about halfway through it, I realized I didn't know what to tell them next. And so all right, come here, Aaron. And I just hit the belly whizzer. So the muscle memory was there. I hit it just as good as I ever had, but I couldn't walk them through it. And so that whole first year, I would do what you did. I'd write everything down on a notepad before I got to practice to make sure I wasn't screwing up teaching these kids. And um, so that resonated a lot with me. What's cool is I still keep up with those guys. I talk to JT a lot, not a lot. I talk to him, once a month probably. Last year, I had JT. I got my whole team in and had JT talk to him about what it takes to become a champion, a state champion, and then what it takes to to stay on top, and what he recommends to new wrestlers. And he did that for an hour with the whole team sitting there watching it was a video chat kind of like this, and they got to see him, he got to see them. That was good for them. But yeah, I tell my kids that, I did a lot in wrestling, but that medal is one of my most proud medals because I have so much respect for JT Taylor. He's such a great wrestler, and he's such a great guy. If you get a chance to talk to him or know him, he started the Youth Impact Center down there where he's at. That's taken off. He's doing really good. But yeah, he was, my junior year, PJ Colbert became I believe he was the second or the third 4-time state champion ever in Florida. And the person to do it before him was Glenn Goodman back in the 70s. So PJ bridged a huge gap, And what's super cool about JT did it the next year. And, this past summer, I was talking on the phone to JT, and I said, how did you have the mental acuity as a freshman to be able to go out and be a state champ? He said, Zach, I got lucky. He said, my coach, when I was summer before my 9th grade year, he took me up to Jacksonville, and we were rolling around, and this guy PJ Colbert was there. He was a junior going into he was a freshman going into his sophomore year, and he had won state title as a freshman. And my coach pointed him out to me, and he told me about him, and he said, I looked at my coach. I said, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And so he went and did it. And, he told that story to my team, and my team has adopted that motto, if he can do it, I can do it. And it's so simple, but that never crossed my mind. I never looked at Zeke or Brandon Helton or Sean Tector or JT Taylor or any of those guys that I went head to head with all the time. I never looked at them and said, if they can do it, I can do it. I looked at them and said, how am I going to catch these guys? You know what I mean? And I think that's the difference between a state champion and a guy like myself that plays third and fourth, and but yeah, I mean, so senior year, that year started. Zeke ranked 1 in the state. I was ranked 2. Me and him had both bumped up 2 weight classes. It was 140 back then, and JT had stayed at 130. So Zeke was 1 in the state. I was 2. And again, same story at districts and regionals. Zeke first, me second at districts and regionals. And then the guy that placed 4th in our region, Joe Green from University Christian, he beat Zeke in the semifinals, he beat me in the semifinals. And Zeke got beat by a kid from Key West. And then the next match, Joe won state. So he placed 4th at regions. And the next week he was a state champion. So and I never won regionals because of Zeke, but two of the best guys I could have ever met, they both have impacted my life in a big way, and Brandon Helton too. Brandon Helton from McCullough, he placed 2nd twice at state. And Brandon and I are great friends. He was at my wedding, and we still keep up every year that we go to McCullough. Brandon will come up there to the tournament, and I make him show my whole team an ankle pick because he's got the best ankle pick I've ever seen in my life. So yeah, I still keep up with those guys. I would still be in touch with Sean Tector had he not passed away. I mean, all the guys that we competed against back then were, we don't talk every day, but when we talk, you feel like you just left off, So the relationships about it are really cool for me. Coach George Mulligan is one of the first people in the history of Rutgers University to be an All-American there. He placed 4th in the NCAA championships in 1955. He started the first wrestling program in Bay County, which was Bay High, but it was a club team. It was all freestyle. He did that in 1959, and then the Bay High program got started in the 70s. So did Mosley's, and so did Rutherford's, and he was instrumental in both of those as well. Him and Coach Bob Hunt were very best friends. They would travel in the summer doing freestyle. When Coach Hunt wanted to start Mosley, Coach Mulligan was right there with him, helping him. Um, but Coach Mulligan passed away in 2018, and Dad at the time, Vern Barth, was the head coach at Bay High. I was assisting there, and the way that I got drug into coaching there, Dad wasn't there at the time, but my little brother, my mother, and my stepfather are military, and they were stationed overseas in England, and they moved home, took early retirement, unexpectedly ended up in Panama City his junior year. So it was a chance for me to, I figured the way I saw it, I had 2 years and he was off to college. So I went knocking on Coach Barth's door, can I please help you? And he let me. He let me help him coach, and he let me in there and have the room quite a bit over those 2 years. And I ended up running a summer program for him, which is kind of what got me deep into it. And then he took a job coaching at his son's elementary school, and that's about the time that Coach Mulligan passed away. And we were at Coach Mulligan's funeral, and the '82 team that Dad was a senior on, I believe they placed fourth in the state that year. It was a really good team. They were all at the funeral, and they all went out afterwards to celebrate Coach Mulligan's life. We started at his family's house and then went out from there. And by the end of that night, they had talked him into coaching. Coach Mulligan, um, it was a big deal to them. So Dad's first goal when he started back was to bring back the Bay Invitational, and he was going to rename it the George Mulligan Memorial. And so that's what he did. If you take Coach Mulligan out of Bay County might not have wrestling until the '80s. You know what I mean? And instead, it was early '60s. So a big deal, and having a college All-American back then come down was a big deal too. He was an educator and he was a teacher, so that was a big deal. When Dad and I took over from Coach Barth, we had 5 kids in the room. We thought we were taking over a team with 37 kids, and returning district champs, and we ended up taking over 5. A team of 5 from Hurricane Michael's devastation. And I realized real quick that culture was going to be a big deal. That we didn't have the athletes in the room to teach the new kids how to wrestle. We didn't have the returning state qualifiers to teach the new guys. So we had to, highlight the culture of Bay High. So we had to teach them about, Coach Frank Feuder and Coach George Mulligan and Coach Jim Lawson and Dad and all the guys that did it before. And I mean, I didn't mention earlier, but Skip over at Mosley, he started coaching my junior year, 2001. So I didn't get to know him too well. I wrestled against him twice, 2 years in a row, and then I went off to college, and then I didn't have anything to do with wrestling for 5 or 6 years after college. But that's another one, stepping into coaching. When he came back into coaching 3 or 4 years ago, I got a chance to get to know him, and man, I picked up a ton from him about as far as he's big on management. Having the right people around you, and making sure that your kids have the right resources to tap into, that type of thing. So talking about these other guys, I mean, Glenn Faust, y'all had him on the show. He's one of the board members for Coastline. I pick his brain as much as I can. I mean, all these guys that have done it before, you're trying to do the same thing they've done. So I mean, I wish that I could I known sooner about the guys that you had on your show. I just listened to them this week, but I'm telling you, there's some of those I'm going to push replay on several times. Just the culture and knowing who was in front of you and making sure the people that are wrestling now know about what they did. If you really want to build wrestling, then you gotta have a foundation, and they are the foundation. So I mean, if we're going to get Bay High back on the map, if we're going to build a state competitive team here, which is the goal, then man, we got to let these kids know, who was here before them, you know. So that's important to us. Hey, let me tell you how that happened because you'll get a kick out of it. Okay, when I was a freshman at Bay High, this was back when you had those camcorders that sat on your shoulder and you look through the little eye hole. You know what I'm talking about? Right, Dad had one of them. Okay, and Dad thought that he was, the next Hollywood producer. Okay, so Dad had to film everything. Okay, but Dad figured out something that changed the way I wrestle. Okay, he about I think it was about halfway through my freshman year. If a kid took me down, then after the match, I had to take Dad's camcorder, had to go track that kid down, and I had to make him teach me that move on camera, and then I had to go home and learn it. So I probably drove Sam Hazewinkle crazy for 2 years. You know what I mean? I never wrestled Sam, but Dad would see something that Sam did or something Nate Thornton did, and they were at every tournament we were at because Pensacola, Panama City, right there together. Uh, I never wrestled Sam or Nate, but man, he'd make me go. He'd see something they do, go get him to teach you that. Go get him to teach you that. And I spent the next 3 years doing it. I mean, my senior year, I didn't get taken down much, so it wasn't a big deal. But yeah, my freshman, sophomore, and junior year, you can ask the guys. Brandon Helton, you wouldn't believe how many times I had to get him to teach me a move. And you want to talk about embarrassing? Man, I was so embarrassed, but he made me do that and it made me better. And now that I coach, I mean, last year at Border Wars, I'm sitting in the corner, I'm watching a match, I'm watching my guys wrestle, and I'm hearing something behind me that I've never heard before. I'm hearing wrist trap, wrist trap. And I'm like, what is he talking about? Well, I turn around and it's PJ Colbert yelling at one of his kids. And I sat there, watched his next match. I sat on the side, waiting for PJ to say wrist trap so I could figure out what the kid's doing. And he said it, and I still didn't know what was going on. I'm watching the match, listening to him call out the move. Like, what in the world? So the match gets over, and I walk up to PJ. I'm like, hey, man, you're going to have to tell me what you're yelling this wrist trap about because I've watched you, I've heard you, and I still can't tell what's going on. And, hey, he showed me that move, and I promise you right now, every kid on my team knows it. You know what I mean? And they wouldn't if it weren't for that. So yeah, I think guys that try to say that they did it all or they're the reason why. I mean, I tell my kids all the time, if you get a medal at state, your name's going up there on that banner in that gym, and my name's not going to be next to it. Because I didn't win it, you did. And but it ain't just me. If I'm in there coaching those kids by myself, you know, uh, Coach Mulligan was in my corner when I was in the state semifinals. I practice with Coach Mulligan every day. I practice with my dad every day. Coach Hallman, uh, anybody that's ever taught me how to wrestle, if I'm in there teaching, it might as well be them speaking because I learned it from somebody else. And yeah, so I try to learn every chance I get. I am not too proud to come ask a coach to show me how their kid just did that move, or ask a coach, hey man, how do you get these kids to believe in themselves? Because that's a big deal for me. I've got a couple talented kids in my room that are young. I've got a couple that have just been wrestling for a year, and they're talented. I mean, they're good and they got good quick. One of them pinned the number 3 kid in the state a few weeks back, but man, you got to get them to believe in themselves. He's doing this, but he still doesn't know who he is or what he is, and I've got several on the team like that. So that's listening to Coach Reap and listening to Coach Crowder and Skip and all those guys you interviewed talking about that. Yeah, you can bet I'm taking notes. You know what I mean? And I do it to every time me and Travis Laxton are really good buddies, and it's not a bunch that Coach David Laxton's in town, but man, when he is, at Travis's wedding, the night of Travis's wedding, I was in Coach David Laxton's room, getting him to teach me his sweep single leg, and he was teaching me with a chair in his room. So, yeah, I mean, I'll never stop doing that for sure. So for the younger guys, I'm not with the crowd on this one. I've got a 6-year-old. He started wrestling last year at 5. His record was 1-9. He had 1 win and 9 losses. And in those 10 matches, he didn't hear me in the corner say the word sprawl. He didn't hear me say half. He didn't hear me say cradle, because he didn't know what any of that was. He wrestled his first year of competition last year. I never taught him a half. I never taught him a sprawl. Uh, what I had my eye on with him was how was he going to develop athletically. Um, and so I wanted him to go out there and wrestle and have fun. I wanted him to go out there and play and enjoy what he was doing. And I wanted to see how he moved. So the things that I taught him uh, were footwork and stance and motion. Uh, and the only move that I taught him last year, his first year, the only move that I taught him was a shot. I taught him 1 shot. I didn't teach him 10 shots. I taught him 1 shot. I didn't teach him how to do a half. Now there was times in matches where I would walk him through a half, under the arm, over the neck, circle the head, but I didn't say the word half. I didn't teach him a move, and he was 1-9. But from the first match he wrestled to the last one last season, I saw a gigantic improvement that the records don't show, but I knew it was there. And then this summer, I didn't. He comes to practice with me when I coach the high school kids in the club stuff. He'll come and he'll sit there and watch and play his switch or whatever. Um, but this summer, I didn't let him compete. I didn't enter him in any tournaments this summer. And then last month, I put him in a tournament at North Bay Haven and wasn't planning on it. I was taking my high school kids to that one. And that morning when I got up to go, he said, "Daddy, I want to wrestle today." I said, "Well, grab your shoes, get in the truck. We're running late. Let's go." And we got there. I weighed him in, and he went 3-2. After 1-9 last year, he went 3-2. And everybody said, "Man, you've been working with him. He's looking a lot better." I said, "I ain't done nothing. All I did was, teach him how to do footwork in his first year, and then gave him a summer off to let it all sink in, and to let his little mind wrap around what was going on, because, at age 5 and age 6, these kids aren't mature enough to understand. You can teach a 6-year-old a cradle easy, and they will duplicate it. They will do it just like you did it. But in my mind, they don't know why they're doing it, and they don't know what position's best to do it at, and they don't know the right time to hit it. And sometimes instead of getting points, they'll go for a cradle. And I teach my kids, even at the high school level, position over points every time, position over points. And so with the younger kids, to answer your question, I focus on position. I focus on athleticism, body movements. A lot of my practices are fun and games and getting these kids to move. So, because as a high school coach, I see these kids. We don't get a lot of them at Bay, but I see them, that have wrestled for 5, 6, 7 years before they get to ninth grade and had some success as 8th and 7th graders. But then they get to ninth grade and they're getting their butt whooped, at least once a weekend when everybody's thinking they're going to be a 4-time state champion. The reason why, in my opinion, is that they learned a head and arm, or they learned a decent double leg or whatever at too young of an age, and they never learned the proper positioning and the proper technique to go through with it, because it just worked. And once it works, they hold on to whatever it is, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. And so with my kid, and I can only speak to my kid, but and his little practice partners, there's 7 or 8 young elementary kids we got out there. But I focus on fundamentals. I focus on stance and motion and movement. And the way he went through in 3-2 at that last tournament, every takedown he got was the same takedown. He just ran around behind the guy and tripped him forward. And I didn't teach him that. He figured that out. He knew he had to get behind the guy, and he's fast enough and athletic enough to do it. But he wasn't last year. It's just because he let himself develop and he took some time off. So I'm different with the crowd on the young kids. I think these young kids are overcooked, uh, and I don't like it. I mean, I love that young kids are wrestling. You know what I mean? when I see a 7-year-old throwing in legs and trying to run a guillotine, uh, I was doing that when I wrestled for Coach Hallman in 7th grade because my dad had taught me that, and I remember he jumped my butt about it. And Dad didn't like, that I couldn't do what he coached me to do. But let it all come hindsight 2020, and I start to appreciate, young kids have to develop, and you got to let them, you know. So that's the way I see the young kids. As far as the club scene, I think it's awesome, and I think all these guys are, are really all these coaches are really helping